In the heart of Montana's Paradise Valley, a life-changing encounter is about to unfold. When a rain-soaked stranger appears on Thomas Miller's struggling farm, he does what his father always taught him. He offers help without expecting anything in return. What he doesn't know is that the muddy, stranded traveler before him is Alexandra Morgan, a tech billionaire worth $30 billion who's secretly searching for something money can't buy. She's swapped her designer suits for worn jeans, her penthouse for open skies, all to find one thing that's become extinct in her world: genuine connection. But as Thomas lends her his most prized possession, his father's horse, neither realizes. They're about to discover that sometimes the richest gifts come from those who have the least to give. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn broke over Paradise Valley like it had every morning for the past 32 years of Thomas Miller's life. The soft purple light crept across weathered fence posts, illuminating the dew on late summer grass and the tired angles of a barn that had seen better days. Thomas stood on his porch, coffee mug warming his calloused hands, watching Shadow graze in the morning mist. The old horse moved with the same quiet dignity his father had shown, right up until the end. He took a long sip of coffee, bitter and black, just like his father had taught him. "Coffee's meant to wake you up, son, not taste like a milkshake." The memory brought a smile to his face, even as his eyes drifted to the stack of mail on the kitchen table visible through the screen door. The red past due stamps had become as regular as sunrise these days. Inside, he sorted through the pile again, though nothing had changed since last night. The mortgage notice sat heavy in his hands, its crisp corporate letterhead, a stark contrast to the worn wooden table his mother had lovingly refinished 20 years ago. Third notice this quarter. The bank was running out of patience, and he was running out of options. His father's voice echoed in his mind. "Land's got memory, Tommy. Every seed you plant, every fence you mend, it remembers." He'd built this place from nothing, turning rocky soil into fertile ground through sheer determination and decades of dawn-to-dusk labor. Now modern agriculture was leaving small farms like theirs in the dust. Corporate operations could plant 1,000 acres. In the time it took Thomas to work 40, Shadow nickered outside, pulling Thomas from his thoughts. Time to start the day's work, bills or no bills. He pulled on his boots, their leather cracked but still sturdy, just like everything else on the Miller farm, worn but willing. The morning routine was as familiar as breathing. Check the irrigation lines, mend any fences damaged by deer, tend to the small apple orchard that was one of their few remaining sources of income. As he worked, Thomas's mind wandered to the conversation with his father just before he passed. "The world's changing, son," he'd said, propped up in his hospital bed, but still somehow as sturdy as an oak. "But some things stay true. Treat the land right, it'll treat you right. Help folks when they need it, and never forget the Miller name means something in this valley." The sound of approaching thunder pulled Thomas's attention to the western sky. Dark clouds were building over the mountains, their grey masses promising the kind of storm that could either save or destroy a season's work. He'd need to secure everything before it hit. As he worked his way through the pre-storm checklist, a familiar ache settled in his chest. The farm needed more than just his daily efforts now. It needed capital he didn't have, improvements he couldn't afford. The small farmer's market stall where he sold honey and apples barely covered the basic bills, let alone the major repairs the irrigation system desperately needed. The first fat drops of rain began to fall as Thomas headed back to the barn. He paused at the gate, watching Shadow trot in for shelter, moving with surprising grace for his age. The horse had been his father's pride and joy, a reminder of better days when the Miller farm had been known for its horses as well as its crops. Now Shadow was the last one, carrying not just the legacy of the Miller horse business, but somehow the weight of all his father's dreams as well. Thunder rolled closer as Thomas secured the barn doors, the old wood groaning against the wind. He couldn't help but wonder how many more storms this place could weather, both literal and financial. But as his father always said, worry was like a rocking chair, gives you something to do, but doesn't get you anywhere. The storm hit with the kind of fury Montana was famous for, turning the afternoon sky an ominous shade of green. Thomas was securing the last of the apple bins when he heard it. The distinctive sound of tires spinning helplessly in mud, followed by the frustrated rev of an engine being pushed too hard. He found the rental car half buried in the muck of the old service road that ran along his property line. The sleek sedan was clearly out of its element, its silver paint job already splattered with Montana's particular blend of clay and disappointment. Through the rain-streaked window, he could make out a figure repeatedly shifting between drive and reverse, achieving nothing but deeper ruts. The driver's window rolled down as he approached, revealing a woman who looked about as comfortable in this situation as a cat in a swimming pool. "I don't suppose you know how to get to the main road." Her attempt at a casual tone was betrayed by the white-knuckled grip she maintained on the steering wheel. "That would be about 4 miles back the way you came," Thomas said, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "Though I'm guessing your GPS decided this old logging road was a shortcut." He studied the car's position, already knowing this wasn't going to be a quick fix. "You're pretty well stuck." The woman closed her eyes for a moment, and Thomas caught the flash of something expensive on her wrist before she quickly tugged her sleeve down. "I was afraid you'd say that." She tried once more to rock the car free, but the wheels just spun uselessly. "You're just digging yourself deeper," Thomas said. "Look, my farm's about a quarter mile up. Storm's getting worse. Why don't you wait it out there? I can help you get the car out once the rain lets up." She hesitated, and Thomas saw something flicker across her face. Calculation maybe, or concern. Finally, practicality won out over whatever reservations she might have had. "Thank you. I'm Alex." She gathered a small backpack, locked the car, and stepped out into the rain. The mud immediately claimed one of her boots, nearly pulling it off her foot. She wasn't dressed for this. Her jeans might have been carefully distressed to look worn, but Thomas could tell they'd never seen a real day's work. Still, there was something in the way she squared her shoulders against the rain that spoke of determination. "Thomas Miller," he offered, already shrugging out of his oilskin coat to hand to her. She started to protest, but another crack of thunder changed her mind. The coat swallowed her slight frame, making her look even more out of place on the muddy road. They walked in silence for a few minutes, the storm growing more intense around them. Thomas noticed she kept pace well enough, despite the unfamiliar terrain. There was a deliberateness to her movements that suggested she was used to adapting quickly to new situations. "You're a long way from anywhere," he said as they approached the barn. "Business or pleasure?" "Neither." "Both," she smiled slightly. "Sometimes you just need to get lost to find something." Something about the way she said it made Thomas think there was more to the story, but another blast of thunder cut off any further conversation. They hurried into the barn, where Shadow wickered a greeting from his stall. Alex's eyes went immediately to the horse, her face softening. "He's beautiful." She approached the stall carefully, showing proper respect for a strange horse. Shadow, usually wary of newcomers, stretched his neck out to investigate her. "That's Shadow. Been in the family longer than I have." Thomas watched as she let the horse lip at her palm. "You've handled horses before. A long time ago." There was that. Careful tone again, like someone used to measuring their words. She reached up to push wet hair from her face, and Thomas caught another glimpse of the watch she was trying to hide. Definitely not the kind of timepiece you'd wear on a casual road trip. Lightning illuminated the barn's interior, and in that brief flash, Thomas saw something else in her eyes, a kind of hungry loneliness that all the money in the world couldn't fill. He knew that look. He'd seen it in his own mirror often enough since his father passed. "Storm's likely to last a while," he said, moving to check Shadow's water bucket. "House isn't much, but there's hot coffee and a dry place to wait it out. She hesitated again, and Thomas could almost see the internal debate playing out. Finally she nodded, a genuine smile breaking through her careful reserve. "Coffee sounds perfect." As they walked toward the house, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Alex than met the eye. But then again, his father had always said everyone had a story. You just had to be patient enough to let them tell it in their own time. Morning came with the fresh-washed clarity that follows a big storm. Thomas found Alex already in the barn, watching Shadow with an expression that reminded him of the way his father used to look at the sunrise, like someone savoring something, pure and rare. "He's usually more standoffish with strangers," Thomas said, making his way to Shadow's stall. The horse's ears pricked forward at his approach, but his attention stayed divided between the two humans. "Must sense something in you he likes." Alex ran her fingers along the weathered wood of the stall door, tracing the grooves where Miller had been carved decades ago. "My grandfather had horses," she said softly, then seemed to catch herself. Nothing fancy like Shadow, though. Thomas studied her for a moment. There it was again, that careful editing of words, like someone used to measuring every syllable, but there was no artifice in the way she looked at Shadow. "Want to help me exercise him?" The surprise on her face was genuine. "You'd trust me with him?" "Shadow's a pretty good judge of character." Thomas reached for the old leather saddle that hung nearby, the Miller name still visible in the tooling despite years of use. "Besides, seems like you could use some time with a horse." He showed her how to prep Shadow for riding, though she clearly knew the basics. Her movements were rusty but familiar, like someone remembering the steps to an old dance. When she struggled with the cinch, her sleeve rode up again, revealing that expensive watch she kept trying to hide. This time, she was too focused on the task to notice. "My father taught me on this very spot," Thomas said, adjusting the stirrups for her height. "Used to say a horse can tell the difference between someone who wants to ride them and someone who needs to." He pulled an old photograph from his shirt pocket, creased and worn from frequent handling. In it, a much younger Thomas sat atop Shadow, his father's steady hand on the reins, both of them smiling into the camera. "That was my first real ride." Alex studied the photo, her fingers hovering over its surface without quite touching, as if afraid to leave fingerprints on the memory. "You look happy, both of you." "We were." Thomas tucked the photo away. "Dad believed happiness was pretty simple. Good work, honest dealings, and something alive depending on you to do right by it." He patted Shadow's neck. "Ready to try?" She nodded, and Thomas helped her mount, noting how she automatically found her balance. Shadow stood perfectly still, head turned to watch her with one dark eye, as if assessing this new rider. "Remember," Thomas said, handing her the reins, "he'll follow your lead, but he's got enough experience to know when you're unsure. Trust him, and he'll trust you back." Alex gathered the reins with practiced hands, though Thomas could see tension in her shoulders. Shadow felt it too, shifting slightly beneath her. "Been a while," she admitted. "In my current life, there hasn't been much time for this kind of thing." "Time's funny that way," Thomas said, leading them toward the meadow. "We think we don't have enough of it, but sometimes it's just a matter of remembering what's worth making time for." The morning sun had burned away the last of the storm clouds, leaving the kind of crystalline Montana sky that made you feel like you could see forever. As they reached the open meadow, Thomas could see Alex gradually relaxing into the rhythm of Shadow's walk, her expensive watch catching the sunlight with each step. "Want to try a trot?" he asked, and saw something spark in her eyes. A flash of the girl who must have once loved riding with her grandfather. She nodded, and Thomas gave Shadow the signal. The old horse moved into a smooth trot, years of training evident in every step. Alex matched his rhythm naturally, muscle memory, taking over where conscious thought left off. The smile that broke across her face was different from any expression Thomas had seen from her yet. Unguarded, genuine, almost wild with joy. They worked in the meadow for nearly an hour, Thomas offering quiet guidance, Alex growing more confident with each passing minute. Shadow seemed to remember his role as a teaching horse, responding to her cues with patient precision. "He's amazing," Alex said, as they finally walked back to the barn, her cheeks flushed with exercise and excitement. "They don't make them like this anymore." "No," Thomas agreed, thinking of his father. "They sure don't." Inside the barn, Alex dismounted and immediately began helping with Shadow's care, no prompting needed. As they worked side by side, Thomas couldn't help but notice how naturally she fit into this moment, like someone finding their way back to a truth they'd forgotten they knew. "Thank you," she said as they finished, her hand resting on Shadow's nose. "I didn't realize how much I missed this." Thomas thought about the watch she kept trying to hide, the careful way she edited her words, the hunger in her eyes when she looked at Shadow. There was a story there, but he figured it would come out in its own time. For now, it was enough to see how Shadow had helped her drop her guard, if only for a morning. "Sometimes," he said, thinking of his father's words, "the things we need most are the things we think we don't have time for anymore." The kitchen in the Miller farmhouse told its own story. Copper pots hung from a rack Thomas's mother had installed decades ago, their surfaces mellowed by years of use. A collection of hand-carved wooden spoons rested in a ceramic holder by the stove, each one shaped by his mother's patient hands during the long winter evenings when the valley grew quiet. "Hope you're okay with simple fare," Thomas said, pulling ingredients from the fridge. "Could do breakfast for lunch. Fresh eggs. From my neighbor's hens, sourdough I baked yesterday." Alex sat at the worn kitchen table, still flushed from their morning ride. She'd pushed up her sleeves to wash up, no longer seeming to care about hiding her watch. "Sounds perfect. Can I help?" Thomas handed her one of his mother's wooden spoons and a bowl. "You can beat the eggs. Mum always said they taste better when someone else does the whisking." She took the spoon, running her thumb over the smooth handle. "These are beautiful. Handmade. Mom's work. She'd spend winter evenings carving them. Said every good kitchen needed at least one spoon with a story behind it." He smiled, setting a pan on the stove. "Course, she ended up making about 30 of them. My grandmother used to say something similar about teacups," Alex said, then paused as if she'd revealed too much. But she continued whisking, her rhythm steady. She collected them from everywhere she traveled. Said tea always tasted better when the cup had a journey behind it. Thomas sliced the sourdough, the crust crackling under his knife. "Sounds like a wise woman." She was. Alex's whisking slowed. "Before everything changed, she used to make me tea in those cups and tell me stories about where each one came from. After she passed, She stopped abruptly, switching tracks. They ended up in storage somewhere. Thomas could hear the weight of unspoken words in that pause, but he just nodded, laying the bread slices in the pan to toast. The sizzle filled the comfortable silence between them. "This is real sourdough," Alex said after her first bite, surprise evident in her voice. "Not the commercial kind. Starter's been in the family for 3 generations. Thomas poured them both coffee in thick mugs that had survived countless morning rituals. "Dad used to say you could taste the history in every slice." "You mention him a lot," she observed softly. "Your father." Thomas settled into the chair across from her, wrapping his hands around his coffee mug. "Been gone 2 years now. Some days it feels like yesterday, others like a lifetime ago." He glanced around the kitchen. "Place is full of him. Full of both. Of them, really. But you stayed," Alex said, more statement than question. "Land's got memory," Thomas quoted his father. "Every season leaves its mark, good or bad. Feels like leaving would mean letting go of all those marks, all those memories." He smiled slightly. "Probably sounds foolish to someone who's seen more of the world than this valley." Alex was quiet for a moment, staring into her coffee as if it held answers. "It doesn't sound foolish at all," she finally said. "Sometimes I think we're too quick to let go of things that matter, just because holding on is hard." She touched the wooden spoon again. "All these pieces of your family, history, they're worth something no bank can measure." The words hit closer to home than she could know. Thomas thought of the mortgage notices, the mounting pressure to sell. "World's changing," he said, echoing his father's hospital room words. "Sometimes feels like there's no place left for farms like this." "The world always changes," Alex said, her voice taking on a different tone, sharper, more assured. "But that doesn't mean everything new is better than everything old. Sometimes progress means finding ways to preserve what matters while adapting to what's necessary." She caught herself, retreating from that momentary intensity. "At least that's what my grandfather used to say about his horses." Thomas studied her over his coffee cup. There were layers to Alex he couldn't quite puzzle out. Moments when a different person seemed to peek through the careful facade she maintained. But there was something genuine in the way she looked around his kitchen, in how she handled his mother's spoons with reverence, in her understanding of what this place meant. "More coffee?" he offered, and she smiled, holding out her mug. They spent the rest of the meal talking about simpler things, the way Shadow had known just how to handle a returning rider, the chances of more rain, the best way to get her car out of the mud. But underneath ran a current of understanding, a shared recognition of something valuable in this moment of fresh bread, hand-carved spoons, and unhurried conversation. As they cleared the dishes, Alex ran her fingers one last time over the spoon she'd used. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for breakfast, for Shadow, for—" She gestured vaguely at the kitchen, as if trying to encompass something larger than the meal they'd shared. Thomas understood. In a world that moved too fast, that valued new over old and profit over memory, there was something to be said for a kitchen full of stories and a meal made by hand. "Stay for dinner," he found himself saying. "I make a mean beef stew, and there's more sourdough." She hesitated, that familiar calculation crossing her face, but then she looked around the kitchen, once more at all the pieces of history it contained, and nodded. "I'd like that." The afternoon sun had taken on that golden quality unique to late summer when Thomas found Alex standing at the edge of the apple orchard, studying the trees with an intensity that suggested she was seeing more than just fruit and leaves. Thinking. "Deep thoughts?" he asked, carrying 2 pairs of work gloves, his current ones and his father's old pair, worn smooth by years of use. She turned, and for a moment he caught an expression on her face he couldn't quite read, something between longing and resolution, just thinking about how different everything is here, how real it all feels. Thomas held out his father's gloves to her. "Want to feel even more real? Could use an extra pair of hands with the irrigation check." Alex took the gloves, running her thumb over the name Miller, still faintly visible on the leather. She slipped them on, and Thomas noticed she didn't hesitate this time to push up her sleeves, expensive watch and all. "Your father's?" she asked, flexing her fingers in the 2 large gloves. "Yeah. Been meaning to oil them, keep them preserved. But somehow it feels right letting them see a little more work first." They walked between the apple trees, Thomas showing her how to check the irrigation lines for leaks or blockages. She picked it up quickly, with the focused attention of someone used to mastering new skills. When they found a clogged line, she insisted on helping clear it, not minding the mud that splashed her designer jeans. "You're good at this," Thomas observed as she efficiently cleaned a filter. "Quick learner." "Had to be," she said, then added more quietly, "In my line of work, adapting quickly is essential." She paused, hands deep in the task. "But this is different. This is—" She struggled for words. "Tangible. You can see exactly what needs fixing and know when it's right." Thomas nodded, understanding what she meant. "Dad used to say, that's the beauty of working with your hands. At the end of the day, you can point to something and say, I made that better." They worked their way through the orchard, falling into an easy rhythm. Alex asked questions about the farm's operations, showing an understanding of systems and efficiency that surprised him. When she suggested a modification to their checking pattern that would save time, Her eyes lit up with the same unguarded enthusiasm he'd seen when she was riding Shadow. "Sorry," she said, catching herself. "I shouldn't be trying to reorganize your farm after being here 5 minutes. No, it's a good idea." Thomas smiled. "Dad always said wisdom can come from unexpected places. Just have to be humble enough to recognize it." The mention of his father made him think of the mortgage notices waiting inside. Alex must have noticed something in his expression because she stopped working, those sharp eyes studying him. "The farm's in trouble, isn't it?" she asked softly. Thomas was quiet for a moment, checking another irrigation line. "Times are changing," he finally said. "Small farms like this, we're becoming dinosaurs. Big operations can do in a day what takes me a week, but they can't do this." Alex gestured around them. "This attention to detail, this care, this history." She looked down at the gloves she wore. Sometimes efficiency isn't everything. Coming from someone else, it might have sounded patronizing, but there was something in her voice, a weight of experience perhaps, that made Thomas think she knew exactly what she was talking about. They finished the irrigation check as the sun began to set, painting the valley in shades of amber and gold. Alex stood at the orchard's edge again, but this time her gaze was different, less distant, more connected to the land before her. "Thank you," she said, carefully removing the gloves, "for letting me help, for letting me wear these." She held out his father's gloves, but Thomas shook his head. "Keep them for now. Something tells me you've got more work in you." He smiled. "Besides, they seem to fit you better than they look like they should." Alex's fingers tightened on the gloves, and for a moment Thomas thought he saw tears in her eyes. But then she smiled, tucking them carefully in her back pocket. "Guess I'll have to stick around long enough to put them to good use then." As they walked back to the house, Thomas couldn't help but notice how naturally she moved through his world now, as if the land itself had recognized something in her worth trusting. His father would have appreciated that, he thought. Would have. Seen past whatever story, she wasn't telling to the truth of who she was when her hands were in the soil and his gloves were on her fingers. Saturday morning dawned clear and crisp, with just enough autumn in the air to make Thomas's honey and apple display look even more appealing. Alex had insisted on helping load the truck, wearing his father's gloves like they'd always belonged to her. "Market's been running 40 years, Thomas explained as they drove into town. "Same families, same spots, mostly same recipes too." He glanced at the jars of honey arranged in wooden crates, each bearing a hand-drawn label. "Mom designed those labels. Haven't had the heart to change them." The market spread across the town square, pickup trucks and folding tables creating familiar lanes of commerce. As Thomas began setting up, he watched Alex take it all in. The old ladies with their preserves, weather-beaten ranchers selling grass-fed beef, young couples with organic vegetables and optimistic dreams. "Morning, Tommy!" Mary Chen called. From the next stall over, her famous sourdough arranged in crusty loaves. "Who's your friend?" "Alex," she introduced herself, helping Thomas arrange honey jars. "Just passing through." Mary's eyes twinkled. "Funny how some people pass through and some people find where they're meant to be." She turned to Thomas. "Your daddy would have liked her. She's got good hands with those jars." The morning unfolded, with a rhythm as old as the market itself. Regular customers stopped by, each with a story to share. Mrs. Patterson bought her usual 2 jars of honey, telling Alex how Thomas's father had helped her husband with fence repairs every spring for 20 years. Old Joe Marcus examined the apples with expert eyes, declaring them Miller quality through and through. Alex absorbed it all, handling transactions with unexpected skill while Thomas talked farming with other vendors. He noticed how she remembered everyone's names, their preferences, their connections to the farm's history. There was something both professional and genuine in her manner, like someone used to much larger dealings but finding honest joy in these simple transactions. "You're good at this," he said during a quiet moment. "Natural retailer." She smiled. But her eyes held that careful look again. "I've had some experience in customer relations." She straightened a row of honey jars. "But this is different. Here you're not just selling products, you're sharing pieces of history, of family. That's what Dad always said, called it marketing with memory." Thomas adjusted the hand-drawn labels his mother had designed. Said, every jar of honey, every apple carried a piece of the farm's story. "He was right," Alex said softly, running her fingers over one of the labels. In most places, everything's about efficiency, scalability. The story gets lost in the spreadsheets." Before Thomas could respond, Billy Thompson's kid came running up, clutching a handful of change. "Mr. Miller, Mom says, can we get the big jar this time? I saved up extra." Thomas knelt down to the boy's level just like his father always had. "Well now, let's see what you've got there, partner." He counted the change carefully, making a show of it. "Looks like you're a little short for the big jar." Oh, the disappointment on the boy's face was painful to watch. "But," Thomas continued, "seeing as you worked hard saving up, I think we can make a special deal." He wrapped up the large jar, accepting the boy's carefully counted coins as if they were gold. Alex watched the transaction with an expression Thomas couldn't quite read. After the boy left, she said, "You lost money on that sale. Gained something worth more, though." Thomas smiled. "Dad always said good business isn't just about the money. It's about building something that lasts. That kid will remember. This day, maybe someday he'll tell his own kids about the Miller Farm honey." "Building something that lasts," Alex repeated, almost to herself. She was quiet for a moment, then added, "Your father was a wise man." The rest of the morning passed quickly. As they packed up, several vendors stopped by with extras. Mary's sourdough, fresh tomatoes, a chunk of homemade cheese. Thomas noticed how they all made a point of including Alex in their conversations, as if she'd somehow become part of the market's extended family in just one morning. On the drive back, Alex was quieter than usual, looking at the valley with new eyes. "I understand now," she finally said. "Understand what?" "Why you stay, why you fight for this place." She touched the dash of the old truck gently. "It's not just land and buildings. It's a whole web of connections, of history, of trust. You can't put a price on that." Thomas thought about the mortgage notices, about the bank's cold calculations, that saw only numbers, not stories. "No," he agreed. "You can't, but sometimes the world tries anyway." Alex's hand tightened on the paper bag of market treasures in her lap, and Thomas caught that flash of determination in her eyes again. But she said nothing more as they drove home under the vast Montana sky, each lost in thoughts of value and worth, of prices and things beyond price. Back at the farm, Alex's phone buzzed for the third time in an hour. She glanced at it, her face tightening, then declined the call. Thomas pretended not to notice as they unloaded the market supplies, but he caught her slipping away toward the barn, phone pressed to her ear. "James, I need more time," he overheard as he approached with the last crate. Her voice had changed, sharper, more authoritative. "No, don't release the statement. I don't care what the board thinks. This is my decision." Thomas deliberately made his boots scuff against the barn floor. Alex turned quickly, ending the call. For a moment he saw someone else standing there. Someone used to commanding rooms, not asking permission. "Everything okay?" he asked, setting down the crate. "Fine." The word came too quickly. "Just some work things I need to handle." She gestured toward her backpack, partially hidden behind a hay bale. A newspaper had fallen out, its business section visible. Thomas caught a glimpse of a headline about tech industry mergers before she quickly tucked it away. Shadow nickered from his stall, breaking the awkward moment. Alex went to him, clearly grateful for the distraction. She was wearing his father's gloves again, the incongruity of the worn leather against her expensive watch more striking than ever. "You know," Thomas said carefully, "my dad used to say secrets are like stones in your boots. The longer you walk with them, the more they wear you down." Alex's hands stilled on Shadow's neck. "Sometimes secrets protect people," she said quietly. "Sometimes they're not yours alone to tell." "True enough." Thomas began organizing the empty market crates. But sometimes they also keep us from being who we really are. She turned to face him, and for a moment he thought she might say more, but her phone buzzed again, and the wall came back up behind her eyes. "I should check on my car," she said, "see if it's dry enough to get out." "Alex!" Thomas started, but she was already moving past him, her shoulders set in that determined line he was coming to recognize. He found the newspaper after she left, forgotten in her haste. There, on the business page, was a photo he recognized despite the corporate attire and sleek styling. Alexandra Morgan, CEO of Morgan Tech Solutions, featured in an article about her company's groundbreaking new rural connectivity initiative. The photo showed her in a boardroom, every inch the powerful executive, nothing like the woman who'd spent the morning selling honey in his father's old gloves. The article praised her innovative leadership, her vision for bridging the digital divide between urban and rural communities. But it was the last paragraph that caught his eye. Sources close to the board suggest Morgan's recent disappearance and delayed product launch may indicate trouble at the tech giant. When reached for comment, Morgan's office stated she was taking a brief personal leave to consider strategic options. Thomas folded the paper carefully, sliding it back where he'd found it. The pieces were falling into place now. Her careful editing of her past, the expensive watch, the authoritative phone calls. She wasn't just any wealthy person playing at country life. She was someone whose decisions affected thousands of lives, whose absence was noteworthy enough to make headlines. Shadow whinnied softly, drawing Thomas's attention. The old horse was watching the barn door where Alex had disappeared, as if he too was trying to reconcile two versions of the same person. "Yeah, I know, boy," Thomas said, patting Shadow's neck. "She's still her, just more complicated than we thought." He thought about the way she'd handled the market transactions, how quickly she'd grasped the irrigation systems, her comments about efficiency versus care. It all made sense now. She wasn't just someone who appreciated his world. She was someone who understood systems, who could see both the small picture and the large one. But there was something else. Something that made him pause before going to confront her. He remembered her genuine joy riding Shadow, her reverence for his mother's carved spoons, her understanding of what the farmer's market really meant. Those moments hadn't been an act. They couldn't have been. The sound of a car engine turning over echoed from the front of the property. Thomas walked to the barn door, watching as Alex's rental car finally pulled free of the mud. She sat there for a long moment, engine idling, and he could almost feel her internal struggle from where he stood. Finally, she turned off the engine and got out. Even from a distance, he could see she was still wearing his father's gloves. The old weather radio on Thomas's kitchen counter crackled to life, its worn speaker carrying the familiar voice of the local meteorologist. Severe thunderstorm warning for Paradise Valley, high winds, potential for hail. Residents advised to secure property and livestock. Thomas found Alex already in the barn, methodically checking Shadow's stall. She'd been quiet since returning from her car, a new tension visible in her shoulders. The evening light filtering through the barn, slats cast alternating shadows across her face as she worked. "Storm's coming in fast," he said, testing the waters between them. "Going to be worse than the one that brought you here." She nodded, not quite meeting his eyes. "What needs to be done?" "Everything loose needs to be secured. Irrigation lines, market supplies, equipment." He paused. "Could use help, if you're staying." Now she did look at him, searching his face for something. Whatever she found there made her square her shoulders. "Of course I'm staying. Just tell me where you need me." They worked together in the growing darkness, the air heavy with approaching rain. Thomas showed her how to secure the irrigation lines so they wouldn't whip free in the wind, how to reinforce the apple bins against hail. She took to each task with focused intensity, as if trying to lose herself in the physical work. "My father used these for 40 years, Thomas said, showing her how to tie down a tarp with his dad's special knot. Said a storm can destroy in minutes what took months to build. Have to respect that kind of power. Your father, Alex said softly, practicing the knot. He seems to have had wisdom for everything. Not everything. Thunder rolled closer as Thomas secured another corner. He never did figure out how to save this place from changing times. That was the one storm he couldn't weather. The wind was picking up now, bending the younger trees in the orchard. Alex's hair whipped around her face as she worked, but her hands remained steady. Sometimes, she said, almost too quietly to hear over the wind, the things we think will destroy us end up showing us a new way forward. Before Thomas could respond, a massive gust tore through the valley. One of the older apple trees groaned, its branches heavy with fruit straining against the wind. Without hesitation, Alex ran to help him brace it, her smaller frame adding its strength to his. She's going to snap, Alex shouted over the wind. Not if we can secure it. Thomas pulled rope from his pocket. My great-grandfather planted this tree. I'm not losing her today. Together, they worked to save the tree, using his father's knots and their combined weight to anchor it against the storm. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, but Alex never wavered, her borrowed gloves dark with water as she helped him run support lines to nearby posts. It was dangerous work in the growing storm, but there was something pure in it, this shared battle against nature's fury. For these moments, there were no secrets between them, no hidden identities or unspoken truths. Just two people fighting to preserve something that mattered. Finally, the tree was secured. They stood in the pouring rain, watching it bend but hold against the wind. Alex's clothes were soaked through, her carefully maintained appearance stripped away by honest work and weather. She looked more real than Thomas had yet seen her. We should get inside, he said, as lightning split the sky. In the barn, they worked quickly to make sure Shadow was comfortable, the old horse watching the storm with experienced calm. Alex's phone buzzed again in her pocket, but this time she didn't even reach for it. It's getting worse, Thomas said, checking his father's old weather radio. Probably should wait it out in the house. Safer there. Alex nodded, but lingered for a moment with Shadow, her hand on his neck. The horse leaned into her touch, and Thomas saw something shift in her expression, like someone recognizing a crossroads when they come to it. Thomas, she started, her voice barely audible over the storm. There's something I need to... A deafening crack of thunder cut her off, making them both jump. Shadow snorted, stamping nervously. Later, Thomas said gently. Right now, let's just focus on weathering this storm. As they ran through the rain toward the house, Thomas couldn't help but wonder which storm would prove more challenging, the one raging across his land, or the one he could see building behind Alex's eyes. Inside the farmhouse, rain drummed against the windows with growing intensity. Thomas lit the old kerosene lantern his father had always kept ready, its warm glow creating a shelter of light in the gathering darkness. Alex stood dripping in the kitchen, looking somehow younger with her composure washed away by the storm. Here, Thomas said, pulling his mother's hand-sewn quilt from the back of a chair. You're shivering. Alex wrapped the quilt around her shoulders, her fingers tracing the intricate pattern of stitches. This is beautiful. Family heirloom? Mom made one for every major event. This one was for my high school graduation. He smiled at the memory. Said every important moment should have something handmade to remember it by. Thunder shook the team in-house, and the lights flickered ominously. Thomas moved to stoke the wood stove, its heat pushing back against the storm's chill. Power might go out. It usually does in the big ones. You seem very prepared for all this, Alex observed, settling into a chair by the stove. Have to be out here. Dad's first rule of farming, nature doesn't care about your plans. He put coffee on the stove. You learn to adapt, to be ready for anything. Alex was quiet for a moment, watching the storm through the window. Sometimes I think that's what I've forgotten how to do, she said finally. Adapt. Really adapt. Not just control. Thomas let the silence stretch, giving her space to continue if she wanted to. The quilt had slipped slightly, revealing the expensive watch she'd stopped trying to hide. "In my world," she continued, her voice soft but clear, "everything is about control. Managing variables, mitigating risks, maintaining image." She pulled the quilt tighter. Even this trip was supposed to be controlled, a calculated escape. But then that storm came, and my car got stuck, and suddenly, she gestured around the kitchen, suddenly I'm here, and nothing is going according to plan. And somehow that feels more right than anything has in years. The coffee began to percolate, filling the kitchen with its familiar aroma. Thomas poured 2 cups, handed her one. "Sometimes the best things in life are the ones we don't plan for." "Your father say that too?" The question could have been mocking, but her tone was genuine. "No, that one's all mine." He smiled, though he probably would have agreed. Another crash of thunder, closer this time. Alex jumped slightly, coffee sloshing in her cup. Without thinking, Thomas reached out to steady her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. For a moment, neither of them moved. "I'm not who you think I am," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know." Their hands were still touching on the coffee cup. She looked up sharply. "You know? Found the newspaper in the barn." He gentled his voice. "Alexandra Morgan, CEO of Morgan Tech Solutions." The cup trembled slightly in her hands. "How long have you known?" "Few hours." He released her hand slowly. "Explains a lot, actually. Your understanding of systems, your way with people at the market, how you look at problems and see solutions. And you're not angry that I lied?" Thomas considered this, watching the storm rage outside. "Did you? Lie, I mean. Seems to me both versions are real. The CEO and the woman who helped save my great-grandfather's apple tree. Maybe one's just been buried under the other for a while." The lights chose that moment to go out, leaving them in the gentle glow of the kerosene lantern. In the softer light, Alex's careful mask seemed to slip further. "I was supposed to be launching our new rural internet initiative this week," she said into the darkness. "A system to bring high-speed connectivity to places like this. But something about it felt wrong. Efficient, profitable, but wrong. So I ran." She laughed softly. "Straight into a storm and onto your farm." "Maybe you needed to see what you were trying to save," Thomas suggested. "Not just the data and demographics, but the real places, the real people." "Maybe." She was quiet for a long moment. "I never expected this. You. This place. It's changed how I see everything." Thomas added wood to the stove, letting her words settle in the warm darkness. When he turned back, she had moved closer, the quilt trailing from her shoulders like a memory of simpler times. "Thomas," she said, her voice different now, "I don't want to leave." They were standing very close now, the lantern light dancing across their faces. Thomas could see the conflict in her eyes, the pull between two worlds. Slowly, carefully, he reached up to brush a strand of rain-damp hair from her cheek. Then, "Don't," he said simply. The storm raged outside, but in that moment neither of them heard it. Dawn revealed the storm's path across the farm like a story written in broken branches and scattered debris. Thomas found Alexandra already outside, wearing his father's gloves and examining a section of downed fence. She looked up as he approached, a faint blush coloring her cheeks as she remembered the night before. "Damage doesn't look too bad," she said, all business despite the softness lingering in her eyes. "Mostly surface stuff, though this fence section will need complete replacement." Thomas knelt beside her, examining the splintered posts. His grandfather's old toolkit lay open nearby, its worn tools gleaming with decades of use. "Dad always said storm damage was nature's way of forcing us to make improvements we'd been putting off." Alexandra picked up a hammer from the toolkit, testing its weight. "Your father's?" "Grandfather's, actually. Dad inherited it, added some tools of his own over the years. He selected a saw, its handle smooth from generations of palms. Been in the family longer than the farm itself." They worked side by side, falling into an easy rhythm despite the weight of unspoken words between them. Alexandra proved surprisingly capable with basic repairs, though her phone's persistent buzzing threatened to break her concentration. Finally, during a break, she checked her messages. Thomas watched her face change as she read, CEO mask slipping back into place. "The board's getting restless," she said quietly. "They're talking about moving forward without my approval." "With the Rural Internet Initiative?" She nodded, fingers tightening on the phone. "They don't understand why I'm hesitating. On paper, it's perfect, bringing high-speed connectivity to agricultural communities, bridging the digital divide, but after being here," she gestured at the farm around them, "I see what we might accidentally destroy while trying to help." Before Thomas could respond, Shadow's anxious whinny caught their attention. The old horse was staring at something near the orchard. Following his gaze, they spotted more storm damage. One of the main irrigation pipes had burst, water pooling ominously around the roots of several apple trees. "That's not good," Thomas said, already moving. Alexandra fell in step beside him, phone forgotten in her pocket. The next hour was a blur of urgent work. Together they managed to shut off the water flow and begin repairs, but not before the rising mud had threatened a whole section of the orchard. As they worked, Alexandra's phone kept buzzing, each ignored call seeming to weigh heavier on her. "You should answer them," Thomas said finally, tightening a pipe fitting. "Your other life isn't going to wait forever." "I know." She wiped mud from her cheek, leaving a smudge. "But this feels more real, more important than bringing internet to thousands of rural communities." She looked at him sharply. "That's not fair." "No," he agreed, selecting another tool from his grandfather's kit. "But it's true. Look, Alexandra, what you do, what your company does, it matters. Maybe you needed this time here to see how it matters differently than you thought. But that doesn't mean you can hide from it forever." "I'm not hiding," she protested, but they both heard the uncertainty in her voice. "Aren't you?" He kept his tone gentle. "You ran away because something felt wrong with your plan. But maybe instead of running from it, you should use what you've learned here to make it right." Alexandra was quiet for a long moment, absently running her fingers over the worn handle of his grandfather's hammer. Finally she said, "When did you get so wise?" "Must be all that time listening to my dad's sayings." He smiled, but then grew serious. "The world's changing, Alexandra. We both know that. Maybe what it needs isn't people running from change, or forcing it, but people who understand both sides, who can help it change in the right way." Her phone buzzed again, and this time she pulled it out, staring at the screen. "There's a board meeting in 2 hours. Virtual, but..." She looked around at the farm, at the work still to be done. "I should go. Deal with this." Thomas nodded, understanding. "Use the office in the house. It's not exactly a corporate boardroom, but it's perfect," she said softly. Then, more firmly, "I can call in, help them understand what I've learned here. Maybe find a way to make this initiative work that actually helps places like your farm, instead of just changing them." She started to hand him back the hammer she'd been using, but he shook his head. "Keep it for now. Might need it later." Their eyes met, both remembering the night before, the almost kiss in the lantern light. But now the sun was up, and reality was intruding in the form of corporate responsibilities and farm repairs. "Thomas," she started, but he cut her off gently. "Go. Be CEO Alexandra Morgan for a while. The farm and I will still be here." She nodded, straightening her shoulders in a way he now recognized as her preparing to step back into her other role. But she kept his father's gloves on as she walked. Away, and somehow that small detail felt like a promise. The Paradise Valley Diner had been serving the same breakfast special for 40 years, and Thomas had been eating it at the same corner booth every Saturday he could remember. Today, though, something was different. He noticed it the moment and Alexandra walked in. The subtle shift in conversations, the poorly concealed glances, the way phones were quickly tucked away. Mary Chen from the farmer's market intercepted them before they could reach their booth, clutching the local newspaper. Tommy, she said, her eyes darting between them. You didn't tell us your friend was... She turned the paper toward them. There it was, splashed across the front page. Tech billionaire Alexandra Morgan found in Paradise Valley. The article featured a photo from the farmer's market, Alexandra in his father's gloves, selling honey beside him. Below it, a corporate headshot showed her in designer clothes, addressing shareholders. Thomas felt Alexandra stiffen beside him. The careful mask she'd been wearing slipped slightly, replaced by something more vulnerable. The diner had gone. Quiet, every eye on them. I can explain, Alexandra started, but Mary cut her off with a wave. Explain what? That you've been helping Tommy with the farm, that you've been wearing John Miller's old gloves like they mean something to you. Mary's voice was sharp, but not unkind. We may be just small-town folks, but we're not blind. We've seen how you are with the land, with Shadow, with Tommy here. Old Joe Marcus spoke up from his usual spot at the counter. Read in that article that you're planning some kind of internet project for rural communities. His weathered face was unreadable. That why you're really here, studying us like some kind of experiment? No! Alexandra's response was immediate, passionate. I mean, yes, there is a project, but that's not why. She paused, collecting herself. When she spoke again, her voice was steady. I came here by accident, stayed by choice. Everything that happened here, everything I learned, everything I felt, that was real enough to sell honey in borrowed gloves, someone muttered. Yes, Alexandra said firmly, real enough that it's changed everything about how I see my work, my company's plans for rural communities. She looked around the diner, meeting the skeptical gazes. I came here thinking I understood what places like this needed. I was wrong. You can't help a community you don't understand, and you can't understand it from a boardroom. Thomas watched her, seeing both versions of Alexandra merge in this moment. The CEO's confidence with the farmhand's hard-earned understanding. She turned to him, something like apology in her eyes. I should have told everyone sooner, should have been honest from the start, but I was afraid. She smiled slightly. Afraid that if people knew who I was, they wouldn't show me who they really are. Old Joe snorted. Girl, folks around here don't know how to be anything but what they are. He lifted his coffee cup in a sort of salute. Kind of like you these past few days, I reckon. Mary was still looking at the newspaper, at the two contrasting photos. You know, she said thoughtfully, my grandmother used to say you can tell a person's truth by how they handle tools that aren't their own. She nodded toward Thomas. John Miller's gloves seemed to fit you just fine. The tension in the diner began to ease, conversations gradually resuming, but Thomas could see the toll the revelation had taken on Alexandra. She sat quietly in their booth, coffee cooling untouched before her. I've ruined everything, haven't I? She asked softly. Thomas reached across the table, taking her hand. You haven't ruined anything, but maybe it's time to stop trying to be two different people. How can I? That woman in the business photo, the CEO, she's real too. She has responsibilities, obligations. Then be both, Thomas said simply. The world needs more CEOs who know how to mend fences and sell honey. More billionaires who understand the value of hand-carved spoons and family quilts. Alexandra's phone buzzed. It seemed to always be buzzing now, but for the first time she looked at it not with dread, but with something like resolution. The board wants me back, she said. Not just for virtual meetings. They're talking about moving forward with the rural initiative next week. Thomas felt his heart sink, but kept his voice steady. Then you should go. Take what you've learned. Here, make it into something that matters. She tightened her grip on his hand. Come with me. What? To the board meeting. Help me show them what they're not seeing. Help me make this right. Around them, the diner had returned to its normal rhythm, the revelation of Alexandra's identity, already becoming just another piece of local law. But at their booth, time seemed suspended as Thomas considered her words. Finally, he said, Dad always said sometimes you have to leave the farm to know why you want to stay. Alexandra smiled, real and bright. Is that a yes? That's a let me check on Shadow first. Alexandra's corporate credit card sat on Thomas's kitchen table like an alien artifact, its platinum surface reflecting the morning light. Next to it lay his father's worn leather wallet, the contrast almost comical. They were packing for the trip to her board meeting, and every item they chose seemed to highlight the gap between their worlds. "You're sure about this?" she asked, watching him fold his best shirt, the one he wore to church on Sundays. "These people, they can be brutal. Everything is about metrics, market share, quarterly profits. Sounds like they need someone to remind them about other kinds of value." He tucked his father's photo of Shadow into the shirt pocket. "Besides, I've faced down angry bulls. How bad can a boardroom be?" But his attempt at humor fell flat as Alexandra's phone lit up with another message. Her expression tightened as she read it. "They're moving up the timeline. Want to announce the rural initiative at tomorrow's shareholders' meeting." She looked up at him. "They're trying to force my hand." Thomas watched her pace the kitchen, her designer boots that had arrived by courier that morning clicking against his mother's old floor tiles. She looked both more and less herself in her corporate clothes, powerful but somehow constrained. "The board doesn't understand," she continued, frustration evident in her voice. "They see rural communities as untapped markets, data points on a spreadsheet. They don't see the Mary Chens, the old Joes, the family farms trying to survive." "So make them see," Thomas said quietly. "You're not just their CEO anymore. You're someone who's sold honey in a farmer's market, fixed irrigation pipes in the rain, ridden a horse named Shadow." She stopped pacing, picking up his father's gloves from where they lay next to her laptop. "It's not that simple. The initiative has been in development for 2 years. Millions invested, partnerships arranged, promises made to shareholders. Then make it better, not different." Thomas stepped closer, taking the gloves from her hands. "You're trying to connect communities like this to the modern world, right? So do it in a way that strengthens what's already here instead of replacing it." Alexandra stared at him for a long moment. "That's actually brilliant." She reached for her laptop, then hesitated. "But the board won't see it that way. They want quick returns, not long-term community building." "Then show them both." Thomas gestured around his kitchen. "Show them how preserving places like this, helping them adapt without destroying them, is good business. Show them the value in understanding the communities they're trying to serve." Her phone buzzed again, her assistant this time, with flight details and meeting schedules. The corporate world was reaching for her with increasing urgency, trying to pull her back into its orbit. "I don't know if I can be both people," she said softly. "The CEO they need, and the person I've become here." "You're not two people," Thomas replied. "You're one person who's finally seeing the whole picture." He picked up her credit card from the table, held it alongside his father's wallet. "These aren't opposing forces. They're just different tools for different jobs. Like my grandfather's. Hammer and your latest tech." Alexandra took the credit card, turning it over in her hands. "Your father would have had something wise to say about this moment, wouldn't he?" "Probably." Thomas smiled. "But I think he'd be more interested in what you have to say. You're the one who has to find the path between these worlds." She nodded, slowly, then straightened her shoulders. The CEO's posture returned, but now it looked less like armor and more like strength. "Then let's show them a different way to build the future." She tucked both the credit card and his father's gloves into her briefcase, something that honors the past while embracing what's coming. Thomas watched her transform, seeing not just the powerful executive or the woman who'd helped him save his great-grandfather's apple tree, but someone new, someone who could maybe bridge the gap between their worlds. "First," he said, "we need to check on Shadow. Can't face a boardroom without saying goodbye to him properly." Her smile was worth all the uncertainty ahead. "Wouldn't dream of it." The corporate headquarters of Morgan Tech Solutions rose 70 stories into the Seattle skyline, its glass and steel exterior a stark contrast to the weathered wood of Thomas's barn. He stood in the lobby, acutely aware of his Sunday shirt. and scuffed boots among the sea of tailored suits and designer heels. Alexandra moved through the space with practiced ease, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. Every head turned as they passed, whispers following in their wake. On a mounted screen, a financial news channel was running the story. Morgan Tech CEO's rural romance, publicity stunt or real deal. The headline was accompanied by photos, some from the farmers' market, others clearly taken without their knowledge. Thomas working on the fence while Alexandra handed him tools, the two of them riding shadow, a moment during the storm when they'd thought they were alone. "Ignore it," Alexandra said tightly, leading him to a private elevator. "The media always tries to make everything into a story." "Isn't it one?" Thomas asked quietly as the elevator doors closed. "A story worth telling?" She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for a moment he saw the woman who'd worn his father's gloves. But before she could respond, the elevator opened onto the executive floor. "Alexandra!" A sharp-dressed man in his 50s strode toward them. "Finally decided to rejoin the land of the living. The board's been going crazy, and the shareholders—" He stopped short, noticing Thomas. "Who's this?" "James. This is Thomas Miller. Thomas, James Chen, my CFO." Alexandra's voice had taken on that corporate edge Thomas was starting to recognize. "Thomas is here to help us understand what our rural initiative really means on the ground." James's smile didn't reach his eyes. "How quaint. But Alexandra, the board meeting is in 20 minutes, and there are serious concerns about the direction of—" "Good. Thomas will help us address those concerns." She turned to Thomas. "Ready?" He nodded, thinking of his father. "Ready as I'll ever be." The boardroom was all glass and chrome, with views of Puget Sound that made Thomas think of his valley. Executives filled the seats, their attention divided. Between their phones and Alexandra, on one wall, screens showed more remote participants, their faces stern. "Before we begin," Alexandra said, taking her place at the head of the table, "I want to thank you all for your patience during my absence. I know there have been concerns about the Rural Connectivity Initiative and about my recent activities." "Concerns is putting it mildly," one of the board members cut in. "Your little farming vacation has cost us valuable time and created a PR circus. The shareholders want growth," Alexandra interrupted smoothly. "They want to see Morgan Tech leading the way in bringing connectivity to underserved markets. But what I've learned is that we've been thinking about this all wrong." She nodded to Thomas, who stepped forward. He could feel the skepticism in the room, see the dismissive glances at his boots, his calloused hands. But he thought of Mary Chen at the farmer's market, of old Joe's wisdom, of his father's legacy. "You see numbers on a spreadsheet," he began. "Potential subscribers, market penetration, profit margins. But I see people, communities, generations of history that technology should enhance, not erase." For the next hour, they laid out their vision. Alexandra moved between the corporate language of ROI and market share to the real stories of the people she'd met. Thomas spoke of the practical needs of farmers, of small business owners, of families trying to bridge the digital divide without losing their way of life. Some board members looked bored, others hostile. But a few began to lean forward, especially when Alexandra showed them how understanding these communities could lead to better adoption rates, more sustainable growth, deeper market penetration. "It's not just about selling them internet," she concluded. "It's about becoming part of their story, helping them write their next chapter without tearing out the previous ones." The silence that followed was broken by a buzz from Thomas's phone. He glanced at it, then went pale. "What is it?" Alexandra asked. "The bank," he said quietly. "They're calling in the loan. The farm. They're starting foreclosure proceedings." The corporate mask slipped from Alexandra's face completely. In that moment, she wasn't the CEO of Morgan Tech. She was just a woman who had found something real in a valley far from here, watching it slip away. And all around them, the board members watched, their phones capturing every moment of vulnerability, every flash of genuine emotion, ready to turn even this into another headline. Alexandra found Thomas in the corporate building's rooftop garden, staring out at the Seattle skyline. Even here, among the carefully manicured plants and designer furniture, he stood like a farmer, feet planted firmly, shoulders squared against whatever weather was coming. "The bank won't negotiate?" she asked, though she already knew the answer from his expression. "They've already got offers." His voice was quiet. "Corporate farming operations looking to expand. They're giving me 48 hours to match the highest bid, or they'll proceed with foreclosure." Alexandra moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel the tension radiating from his body. Below them, the city sprawled in all its modern glory, so different from the quiet beauty of Paradise Valley. "I can help," she said softly. "Let me buy the farm. We can structure it however you want. You can keep running it, keep living there. Nothing would have to change except the paperwork." Thomas turned to look at her, and she saw in his eyes the same pride that had made him spend hours fixing fences instead of replacing them. "You know it's not that simple." "It could be." She pulled a document from her briefcase. A purchase agreement her lawyers had drafted the moment she'd heard about the foreclosure. "The money means nothing to me, Thomas, but that farm, what it represents, what you've built there—" She stopped, searching for words that wouldn't sound like charity. "What my father built," he corrected gently. "What his father built before him." "Yes?" She set the document on a nearby table, the corporate letterhead stark against the weathered wood. "And it can stay in the Miller family. I'm not trying to change anything. I just want to help preserve something valuable. By owning it." The words weren't angry, just heavy with understanding. "Alexandra, you've learned so much about my world. But maybe you're still seeing it through your world's lens. Some things can't be fixed by throwing money at them. Then help me understand." She moved closer, letting her corporate mask slip away completely. "Because I can't just stand by and watch everything you care about be destroyed. There has to be a middle ground." Thomas picked up the purchase agreement, his calloused fingers incongruous against the legal paper. "You know what my father would say about this moment?" "What?" "He'd say that sometimes the hardest part of preserving something is knowing how to let it change without losing its heart." He smiled slightly. Course, he was usually talking about grafting apple trees when he said that, but still. Alexandra felt hope stir. "So you'll consider it?" "I'm considering everything." He set the document down. "But Alexandra, if we do this, if we find some way to save the farm, it has to be real. Not just a billionaire's impulse or a corporate solution. It has to honor what the place is, what it means." She thought about the Miller name carved into Shadow's saddle, about the hand-carved spoons and family quilts, about all the generations of work and love layered into every acre. "What if," she started slowly, an idea forming, "what if instead of me buying the farm, we turned it into something bigger, a model for what our rural initiative could be, a place where traditional farming meets modern technology, where we could show other farms how to bridge that gap?" Thomas was quiet, considering. "You mean use the farm as a kind of learning center?" "Yes, we could set it up as a partnership. Your expertise, your connection to the land, combined with resources to make it sustainable, not just preserving the past, but building a future that includes both our worlds." She watched him process this, saw him looking out at the city, but probably seeing his valley, his trees, his father's legacy. "It wouldn't be the same," he finally said. "No," she agreed, "but maybe it could be better. A way to help other families keep their farms while adapting to changing times. A bridge between what was and what could be." Thomas turned to her then, and in his eyes she saw both the weight of generations and the glimmer of possibility. Dad always said a farm should grow more than just crops, should grow ideas, should grow future farmers, should grow hope. Alexandra picked up the purchase agreement and deliberately tore it in half. Then let's write a different kind of agreement, one that grows all those things. For the first time since the foreclosure notice, Thomas smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. Might need to use both our tools for that. Your lawyers and my father's wisdom. I think, Alexandra said, reaching for his hand, that's exactly what both our worlds need. Back in Paradise Valley, they found a small crowd gathered at the diner. Mary Chen, Old Joe, and other familiar faces from the farmers' market sat waiting, concern evident in their expressions. Word of the foreclosure had spread quickly in the small community. Figured you two would show up here eventually, Mary said, pouring coffee without being asked. We've been talking. Thomas slid into the familiar booth, Alexandra beside him. His father's journal lay on the table. Mary must have retrieved it from the farm while they were gone. Its worn leather cover bore the marks of years of handling, its pages filled with wisdom, penned in his father's careful hand. The whole valley's been talking, Old Joe added, pulling up a chair. About the farm, about what's coming, about changes. We can't stop, but maybe can shape. Alexandra glanced at Thomas, then addressed the group. We have an idea, a way to save the farm, but... She hesitated. It would mean changes, big ones. Honey, Mary said, change has been coming whether we want it or not. Question is, do we let it happen to us, or do we help guide it? Thomas opened his father's journal, finding the page he needed. Dad wrote something about this, back when corporate farms first started buying up land in the valley. Said, a farm's not just dirt and crops. It's a living thing, needs to grow and adapt. But like any living thing, it needs to keep its heart, while it changes. John Miller always did have a way with words, Old Joe nodded, and with seeing which way the wind was blowing. Alexandra leaned forward. What we're proposing is to turn the Miller farm into a bridge between worlds, a place where traditional farming knowledge meets modern technology, where farmers can learn how to adapt without losing their identity. A teaching farm? Mary asked. Like that place over in Idaho? Similar, but more focused on technology integration, showing small farms how to survive in a digital age. Thomas looked around at his neighbors, these people who'd known him all his life. But it would mean changes, new buildings, more traffic, different kinds of crops alongside the traditional ones. The diner was quiet as everyone considered this. Finally, Old Joe spoke up. You know what I think John would say about this? Thomas smiled slightly. What? He'd say any farm that stops teaching ain't really a farm at all, just a piece of land growing stuff. Old Joe looked at Alexandra, and he'd say sometimes the best teachers are the ones who know both the old ways and the new. Mary nodded, touching the journal. I remember when John started experimenting with computer-controlled irrigation. Everyone thought he was crazy, but he knew you either adapt or you disappear. But it would still be the Miller farm? Someone asked from across the diner. Still be Thomas running it? Yes, Alexandra answered firmly. That's non-negotiable. The Miller name, the Miller values, those stay. We just add new tools, new knowledge. Thomas watched his community wrestle with the idea, saw them weighing tradition against survival, pride against pragmatism. These were people who'd known his father, who'd watched Thomas grow up, who understood what the farm meant to the valley. There's something else, he said quietly. Part of the plan is to make sure other family farms can survive too. What we learn, what we figure out, it won't just stay here. We'll share it, help others find their way forward. Like John did, Mary smiled, always helping neighbors figure out new techniques, better ways to do things. Alexandra pulled out her tablet, showing them preliminary sketches. We want to preserve everything that matters, the orchards, the honey production, Shadow's pasture. The new additions would blend in, respect the land. The diner came alive with questions, suggestions, concerns. But underlying it all was a current of hope, not just for the Miller farm, but for all the small farms fighting to survive in a changing world. As the discussion continued, Thomas felt Alexandra's hand find his under the table. She'd taken off her corporate jewelry, but still wore his father's gloves, tucked into her back pocket like a talisman. "You okay?" she whispered. He looked around the diner at these people who'd known him all his life, now helping him find a way to carry his father's legacy forward. "Yeah," he said softly. "I think Dad would understand, maybe even approve. He'd be proud," Mary said, obviously overhearing, "of both of you, finding a way to keep his dreams growing in new soil." The new partnership agreement lay on Thomas's kitchen table, its fresh ink a stark contrast to the weathered wood surface. Unlike Alexandra's original purchase offer, this document had been drafted with input from both worlds, her corporate lawyers working alongside local agricultural advisors, with Mary Chen and Old Joe offering their perspectives. "It's really happening," Alexandra said softly, tracing her finger over their signatures. She'd signed with her CEO authority, but also with something more personal, a small heart drawn next to her name, visible only if you knew where to look. "Dad would get a kick out of this part," Thomas said, pointing to a clause in the agreement. "The requirement that all technology integration must be approved by a council of local farmers. Corporate innovation meets country wisdom." The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating the kitchen where so much had changed. Alexandra's laptop sat next to his mother's carved spoons, her corporate documents mingled with his father's farming almanacs. Like their worlds, slowly learning to coexist. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they could see the first of the new arrivals, young farmers from across the state, come to learn about integrating technology with traditional methods. Thomas recognized some faces from agricultural forums, others from tech conferences Alexandra had introduced him to. "Ready?" she asked, reaching for his father's gloves. They walked out together to greet the group. Shadow watched from his pasture, where high-tech monitoring equipment now shared space with the old wooden fence posts. The horse had adapted to the changes with surprising ease, accepting the new while maintaining his dignified connection to the past. "Welcome to Miller Farm Innovation Center," Thomas addressed the group, using the new name they'd chosen together, though my father would probably still just call it home. For the next few hours, they led their visitors through what they'd created. Alexandra explained the sophisticated soil monitoring systems now supplementing traditional farming wisdom, while Thomas demonstrated how they'd integrated these tools without disrupting the land's natural rhythms. "See these apple trees?" Thomas gestured to his great-grandfather's orchard. "We're using AI to optimize irrigation, but the decisions about pruning, about which varieties to grow, that still comes from generations of knowledge passed down through families like yours." The young farmers asked questions, their enthusiasm bridging the gap between tradition and innovation. One woman, whose family had farmed in Idaho for 5 generations, teared up when she realized she might not have to sell her land after all. "This is what we're building," Alexandra told them, her corporate polish softened by genuine passion. "Not a replacement for traditional farming, but a way to help it thrive in a changing world." They ended the tour at the new learning center, built to resemble a traditional barn, but equipped with state-of-the-art technology. Inside, screens displayed real-time data from the farm's operations, while the walls featured photos of the Miller family through generations. "My board wasn't sure about this project at first," Alexandra admitted to the group. "They wanted something more corporate. But then they saw how understanding and respecting traditional farming actually led to better technology adoption. Now they're talking about replicating this model across the country." Thomas watched her as she spoke, seeing how naturally she moved between her roles now, tech CEO and farmer's partner, innovator and traditionalist. She'd kept her corporate position, but moved her main office to the farm, running her company from the heart of the land she was helping to preserve. After the visitors left, they walked to Shadow's pasture together. The old horse came to greet them, accepting Alexandra's touch as naturally as he did Thomas's now. "You know what this reminds me of?" Thomas said, watching Shadow nibble at Alexandra's sleeve. "What you said about my father's gloves that first day. How they seemed to fit you better than they looked like they should." She smiled, understanding. "Like this life?" This place, like everything we're building here. He took her hand, feeling the calluses she'd earned alongside her corporate success. Different pieces that shouldn't fit together, but somehow do. The sun was setting over Paradise Valley, painting the sky in colors no digital screen could quite capture. In the distance, they could see the lights of the learning center coming on, a warm glow that somehow enhanced rather than diminished the natural beauty of the landscape. "We're really doing it," Alexandra said softly, "building that bridge between worlds." "No," Thomas corrected gently. "We're building something new, something that honors both worlds while becoming its own thing entirely." She leaned against him, both of them watching shadow graze peacefully beneath the evening sky. "Your father would have understood that, I think. He would have loved it," Thomas said, "almost as much as he would have loved you." 1 year later, the morning sun rose over Paradise Valley just as it always had, painting the sky in shades of promise. Thomas stood on his porch, coffee mug warming his hands, watching shadow graze in the misty dawn. Some things hadn't changed, and never would. The crunch of boots on gravel announced Alexandra's approach. She just returned from a board meeting in Seattle, but instead of designer clothes, she wore work jeans and his father's gloves. A new saddle was cradled in her arms, its leather gleaming with possibility. "Early birthday present," she said, setting it down for his inspection. The tooling was exquisite. Traditional patterns surrounding two names worked seamlessly together. Miller and Morgan Farm Innovation Center. Thomas ran his fingers over the leather, feeling the craftsmanship. "It's beautiful, but Shadow's got a few years left in his old saddle yet." "This isn't for Shadow." Alexandra smiled, gesturing toward the pasture, where a young colt grazed beside the old horse. "It's for his successor. Thought it was time he had his own saddle, representing both his heritage and his future." The colt was Shadow's last gift. To them, an unexpected pregnancy in a mare they'd bought for the teaching program. Born on the farm, under the same stars that had watched over generations of Millers, he represented everything they'd built together. "Speaking of heritage and future," Thomas said, "Mary called earlier, said she's finally ready to digitize her family's sourdough starter records. Wants to know if we can help set up that blockchain system you mentioned." Alexandra laughed. "The woman who once said computers had no place in a proper kitchen. Now that's progress." They walked together toward the barn, passing new buildings that somehow looked like they'd always belonged there. Young farmers were already arriving for the day's classes, their eager faces reminding Thomas of his father's belief that teaching was as important as growing. Inside, they found old Joe demonstrating traditional fence-mending techniques to a group of students, his weathered hands moving confidently among the high-tech tools they now used to map and monitor the property. "Reminds me of when you first taught me to check the irrigation lines," Alexandra said softly. "Everything I thought I knew about running a company changed that day." Thomas watched the students absorbing old Joe's wisdom, their tablets recording every detail while their hands learned the feel of the work. "Everything I thought I knew about preserving this place changed when you arrived." They saddled Shadow. Together, their movements synchronized by months of shared mornings. The old horse stood patiently, watching his colt with proud eyes. Like the farm itself, he had adapted to change while maintaining his essential nature. "Board wants to expand." "The program," Alexandra said, as they led Shadow out, "set up similar centers in other farming communities. They're finally seeing what we saw, that the future isn't about replacing the old with the new, it's about helping them grow together." Thomas thought about the journey that had brought them here, from a rain-soaked stranger in borrowed gloves to this moment, their lives and dreams intertwined like roots sharing the same soil. "You know what Dad would say about all this?" Alexandra swung into the saddle, a movement as natural to her now as working on her laptop. "What? That sometimes the best crop a farm can grow is hope." He mounted behind her, feeling her settle back against him. "Hope for the future, rooted in respect for the past." They rode together across the morning fresh fields, past the learning center where students gathered, past the orchards where AI-monitored trees grew alongside their century-old neighbors. The colt followed Shadow, his young hooves marking new paths while following ancient trails. At the property's edge, they stopped to watch the sunrise paint the valley gold. Alexandra reached back, taking Thomas's hand. "A year ago," she said, "I was lost. Trying to solve problems I didn't really understand, thinking success could only look one way. And now?" She turned to face him, her smile as warm as the morning light. "Now I know that the biggest success stories don't fit in annual reports. They're written in small moments, in lives changed, in traditions preserved and renewed." Thomas thought of his father's gloves, still trusted to do important work, of Shadow's colt, carrying old bloodlines into new days, of the farm itself, evolving without losing its heart. "Maybe that's what love is," he said softly, "not changing someone, but helping them become more truly themselves. Like a farm and a tech company? Like a CEO and a farmer." They rode, back as the valley came fully alive, their shadows merging on the dew-fresh grass. Behind them, Shadow's colt pranced through the morning mist, his steps sure and strong, ready for whatever future awaited.